Thank you all so much for coming. I'm gonna sit in this lovely yellow chair, but I'm probably gonna get up and walk around a little bit more. But thank you all for coming on this very hot, lovely day. It is such an unbelievable honor to exhibit at Blue Sky. I've known about this place for quite some time, and it's like has a wonderful history, and so it is such a huge honor to share some of my work here, and I'm so grateful to see and everyone here at Blue Sky. Thank you so much. It has, just been an absolutely wonderful experience, and I'm so glad I was able to make it out here in person. I drove, although Mariette flew, but I drove. My partner and I really enjoy road trips, so we were like, yeah, New York City to Portland, do it in a few days, yeah, no problem. This is my first time in Portland, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I have a few more days here, so if anyone has any recommendations, I've heard everything about the Rose Festival and the Rose Gardens, which I need to check out. So anyway, this exhibition titled "I Want to See How Things Play Out" is an ongoing body of work that I've been working on since about 2018, 2019. And so I'm gonna talk a little bit first about like my background and how I got into photography, all that, biographical stuff, and then I'll, talk about how I got into this work and everything. So I am currently based in Brooklyn, New York. Been there about 7 years now, but before that I was born and raised in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Right in the middle of Amish country. I'm not Amish. Some people ask that, but growing up gay there was a little interesting, I'll say, to say the least. To talk a little bit more about, how I got into photography specifically, when I was in high school and stuff, I was getting really interested in queer activism, and so going to college, I was like, I want to study sociology. I was interested in music and other creative things, but I was like, oh, studying music, that won't get me a lucrative job that pays the bills. So I'm going to study sociology because apparently that is something that pays the bills. I don't know, 17-year-old me, I don't know what I was thinking. And then I was a sociology major for a year, and I was like, I was really interested in talking about sociology and these different, just why society works and how people just function in groups and relationships and things like that. But the doing sociology, oh my God, that was so boring. Too much reading, too much statistics, and I was like, okay, I'm more about I just want the fun stuff. And I was taking a photography course. I took a photography course as an elective. I went to a liberal arts school, so it was you have to take a bunch of electives, and it was a darkroom course. And I instantly fell in love with just at first the process. It was just so cool, dropping a print in the tray and just watching the image actually appear. But then after I started doing a little bit more photography, I realized that I could look at the things that interested me in sociology, but with photography. And in doing so, I didn't have to do as much statistics and reading and all the boring stuff. I could just do the fun stuff that I really liked. So I started, I was doing a bunch of projects that really looked to just have different aspects of society. I did this one project where I just did pictures of people waiting, just standing and waiting in line or waiting to cross the street. And then I did a series where I would hang out at rest stops along highways and photograph people that just stopped at random rest stops, because I was like, you never plan that. When my partner and I were we're gonna drive to Portland, we weren't okay, we're gonna stop at this, this gas station, this restaurant, this rest stop. You're just driving, and you're like, oh, I gotta pee, or I need a drink. So that I can pee again in a few hours. And then you just stop. And so I was really interested in that, this is this area that just people just come across by chance. And so yeah, I was really interested in those sort of things, but I wasn't really looking at my queer identity yet. That wasn't in my work in undergrad. But so a little bit more about growing up gay in Lancaster. Like I said, it was interesting. One thing I like to mention, like I mentioned at the beginning of my statement, is like when I started using gay dating websites and eventually apps, when that started becoming a thing, I feel like, you know, when I started entering the dating scene, that was like just when like apps were like, phone apps were becoming a thing. And of course there's like Grindr and all these apps that are, you know, specifically for gay and queer men to meet each other. And I remember like seeing on people's profiles, no femmes, no fats, or sometimes they'd write like no Asians, no blacks, or just like write off entire groups of people, just be like, nope, like no need to reach out to me. Just gonna tell you I'm just not interested in this whole group of people. And I remember that putting me like in a very weird relationship between like me, my body, and my queerness. Like if, you know, when I started coming out, like, you know, I've always kind of had like a non-normative body and I already felt othered for that. And then when I was like, oh crap, I'm gay. Oh, that's just another thing. Just like, you know, pile that on there, you know, yeah, just pile it on. And so, you know, coming out was a very, like, in some ways liberating, but in some ways really, you know, difficult. And so when I decided to go to graduate school, it was sort of by chance that, like, I never saw myself living or, you know, moving to New York City, but I applied to some art schools in New York City because I was like, I mean, that's what I have to, right? Like, you know, it's like an obligation. And then at first I had only gotten into Parsons and I was on some wait lists and stuff. And then I was like, oh shit. So I like quickly accepted like the, you know, Parsons because they needed to know. And then I got some, accepted to a couple other places, but I was like, well, maybe I'll just, you know, maybe it's a sign. Maybe I'll just, you know, stick with Parsons. And so I, getting ready to move to New York City, I was like, oh, you know what, it's gonna be this like queer utopia. Like I even had people tell me like, oh my God, your dating life is gonna be so amazing, it's gonna be so wonderful. You're gonna meet like so many great other queer people and it's gonna be wonderful. But that wasn't quite exactly, you know, what I experienced. I realized that a lot of that exclusionary practices and attitudes were still there, and in some cases like amplified because in such a large city with like such a large queer community, I feel like you can't even say community, it has to be communities, you know, because there's just so many. That there's almost like a little bit more freedom to be a little bit more exclusionary, because if you're excluding people that you're, you know, not attracted to, there's plenty of other people in the city. Whereas, you know, like in a smaller town or something, you know, if you do that, you're not gonna have a community if you're that exclusive. And so I was feeling really frustrated and I was, you know, a few months into grad school and wasn't quite sure like what I wanted to do with, you know, with photography there. And I was like how do I make photos in New York City, like a city that has been absolutely photographed to death? Like any street corner you can like find, you know, tons of photographs of it. And so out of this like frustration, I created a self-portrait. This top one here with the phone haphazardly like attached to my face. And open on the phone is the app Grindr. And I was sort of thinking about how like it's being, you know, in some cases being like forced onto me and other people and trying to like fit into certain boxes. But also then how sometimes we kind of put that upon ourselves and it can kind of mess with and play with and obscure and change our own identities. And doing a self-portrait was something very uncomfortable for me at first. Like anytime, like in undergrad, like there would sometimes be like a self-portraiture assignment, and I was like, okay, how can I do this in like the most abstract way so that I don't actually have to like look at pictures of myself, so I always found like a way to get around it. But you know, I just kind of like did that on a whim, and even though it was uncomfortable, I kind of you know, there was like a little bit of like a weirdness and some humor in it that I was like, this is something I haven't really done, you know, in my work before. And so I ended up doing a whole series of self-portraits that were all kind of tightly framed like that, where I was putting different objects and materials on my face to play with, obscure, manipulate my identity, and many of the objects and materials were referencing like other, things and themes of queerness and mental health, sexuality, the body, and doing that, it was really how I got interested in like that absurdity and the feeling of like the uncanny. And how, in like a lot of the photos, it wasn't necessarily obvious that it was about anything queer. It was almost kind of like, if you know sort of situation. It was kind of like hidden under the surface. So it was a little ambiguous and open to interpretation, which I really liked. So after doing like, that was in the fall of 2018. And I worked on that for like that series of self-portraits for about a few months. But then I was like, this feels a little too personal. I was like, this is too much about me and like my story, and maybe it's a little like, self-deprecating or whatever, but I was like, why should anyone care just about like me and my experiences? Like, it's just, so I wanted to start photographing like with other people and kind of trying to take that process and doing it with others, and then ended up making this portrait, which actually was kind of like a bridge, because that's me on the left, and someone else, a friend of mine, that, and we made this portrait together. And in doing so, this aspect of collaboration became, was like another thing that I got really drawn to. And I started, photographing then just other people, and sometimes I would, pop back in the photo, like this one over here in the middle of me with someone else. But when doing the shoots and engaging in this collaboration, I was like, this really lends itself well to that like sense of like absurdity and humor and playfulness. So like eventually over time, like, of course my process has evolved a little bit, but I never bring props or any sort of like outfits. Sometimes people ask me like, oh, what should I wear? And I'm like, wear whatever you want. Wear what you're comfortable with. Wear what you think looks good. Whatever, whatever you want to do. And the shoots are usually, not always, but usually in their own space, whether it's like, where they live, or sometimes it's a place that, like a park or some outdoor place that they really like to spend time in. And I don't really bring any sort of like expectations of what the photos should look like. I don't have like a wish list in my head or have a specific, thing in mind. And instead I just show up with just some like openness, and we just kind of start, making work in the space and letting things kind of happen naturally. I kind of compare it to like a little bit of like free association, where one little idea will pop up, and then maybe the other person then gets an idea from that, and then we kind of go back and forth, and then it just kind of like unfolds over time. And that spontaneity and that, like I said, that collaboration like really went well with that absurdity and playfulness, especially because like in many of these cases we end up, it's like there's lots of laughing and playfulness happening and going on, and I think it also like in some ways kind of, might be like a little cheesy, but like connects back to like, oh, it's like that, that connection and sense of community and stuff that, I was kind of like struggling to find for a little bit. And we're kind of making our own sort of community and space, while doing these shoots. As far as the people, like who they are, I also mentioned in my statement that I was in New York and making work there for a while, but I kind of got like a newfound appreciation for my hometown of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, because I realized that like in those smaller towns, like the queer community was like so tight knit, and like there was, you saw like the same people, and they all like worked together for this like common goal, and I realized that, a lot of these like small towns across the country and across the world often have these like really vibrant and rich and tight-knit queer communities, and sometimes it is because they're up against like a face of a negative environment that doesn't really welcome them, so they have to kind of like stick together. And so I wanted to show a little bit more appreciation and make more work in communities like that. So while I was in grad school, I was trying to get some, I got some travel grants, and I started traveling back home to Lancaster to make some work. And then I was going to the Midwest. And that's kind of when this project really took off, when I started making work outside of the city. And I spent some time in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and then I went to Lawrence, Kansas, which amazing, great little city with an amazing queer community. I'll tell a little bit more specific about this one just because it was one of the first times that really got this series going. But someone that I knew was like, oh, I have this friend who lived in this queer co-op housing place. And you should just check out and see if you could just go there and just shoot. Here he is on Facebook. And then so I reached out to him and was like, hey, this is kind of weird. And turns out, so there was this house that had 7 or 8 bedrooms, and they had a bedroom available, just so happened. And I was like, hey, I'd love to come and just stay there for 2 weeks or a few weeks. And they're like, sure, absolutely. And so I got to just it really felt like I was living there with these people. There was 6 or 7 or so other queer people living there, and it was almost kind of like a hub of the community there. Lots of people were coming and going. And so it really made for a rich environment for collaboration, because it could be really spontaneous. Someone would just be hanging out on the couch or something, and I'd be there just hanging out too, and we'd get to chatting, and then I'd grab my camera and things would happen, and rather than this more rigid planned shoots, where it's okay, let's meet at 3 o'clock and at this location. It was much more open than that. And so I kind of tried to carry that on. After grad school, I was doing some residencies. I did a residency in Vermont and Santa Fe, and one in Alaska. And I found I really appreciated, first of all, I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna be paid to go and make work, and and I don't have to, I can just focus on that. That's an incredible experience. But then also I get to actually live there and spend time with the people there, and connecting with people, rather than just oh, I'm just here for a few days and just trying to get photos and leave. So when I do a residency, they're usually, most of them have been about a month. I feel I do very little shooting in the first 2 weeks, because I'm just trying to connect with people and meet people, and sometimes it's people who work at the residency will connect me with people, or I might meet someone online. I used to, when I was still using dating apps, I started using those to try to meet people to photograph. And then it would just kind of snowball from there. I would meet someone, and they'd be like, oh, I have a couple friends who would love to make some photos together, and then they would know people, and they would know people. But again, I didn't want to just show up, take photos, and leave. So I tried to spend as much time as I could with people and connecting with them, because that also kind of breaks down some of that uncomfortableness at first. If you're able to actually get to know someone a little bit, rather than just it feels less like they're a model or something. Which I think is something else with that collaboration and that really free form, spontaneous, playful thing is I'm not really directing people. I might do little bits oh, turn your head a little bit this way, or face a little bit this way, but there's very little okay, I want you to sit here, you're gonna do this, I'm gonna hand you this, it's much more just casual than that. And in meeting new people and going to their spaces and making photographs with them, I've realized that people often have things that they don't really give much thought about, that then, as a bit of an outsider's perspective, I might be huh, that's interesting. So one example is the photograph on the back there with the person on the unicycle, second from the left. That was someone I met in New Orleans, and and he, looked at my work, and we were chatting for a little bit, and he was like, oh yeah, I'd love to do some photos. I don't really have any ideas or know what you could shoot, but, come over and we'll hang out and see what happens. And we were like hanging out in his living room and chatting, getting to know each other a little bit, and I saw this like unicycle in the corner, and I was like, do you unicycle? And he was like, oh yeah, I love to like wear this like mesh lace shirt, and I just like ride around and like unicycle just for fun all the time. And I was like, you didn't think to mention that? Like, okay. It was just like so normal to him. And I was like, well, we definitely have to do some photos with the unicycle. Another example is this one here of the person with all of like the corgi stuff. It was someone who inherited like this house, this very suburban, typical suburbs house from his grandparents that had died, and it just had like all of his grandparents' stuff just in it, and I was just like, what is with all of these corgis? And he was like, I don't know, I guess my grandmother really liked corgis, and I was like, what are you gonna do with it? And he was like, I don't know, and then so. It was like already this like entire shrine to corgis, and I was like, okay, well, let's do some photos with that. And that was one that we were shooting in that house like all day, like morning to night, because there was just so much interesting, weird stuff around. Let's see, I just lost my train of thought there. I do sometimes like revisit self-portraits, and the self-portraits that I've made after I started photographing other people have been different from those more like tightly framed ones where I'm just kind of like focusing on my face. Like there's the one of me with the light bright, and the one with the water tower that says Hooker, which is in the town of Hooker, Oklahoma. I was driving, just the little story about that, when I was driving to Santa Fe from my residency there, and I was just kind of looking at the route and noticed that one of the possible routes went through a town named Hooker, and I was like, well, I definitely need to drive through there. There was one photo, like it's one of those like photos that I wish I would have taken it, but like across the street from this water tower there was Hooker Elementary, and I really wanted to take photos with the Hooker Elementary, but it was like a school day and there was kids, and I was like, I don't want to, I don't, want people to think I'm up to some shady stuff. So I'll have to go back sometime and do that. So this work is still pretty much ongoing, and I don't really see like ever kind of, there's been a few times where I've tried to like stop and I noticed like a change in my work, and I started kind of doing stuff a little bit differently, and I was like, okay, maybe this is like a new series, like a new body of work, but then it still kind of connects back to the older stuff. So I've had a hard time trying to figure out where to place that line and where like a new body of work starts. So I just decided, I was like, you know what, screw it. It's just going to be an ongoing thing, and then I can do things like this, like have an exhibition where it's like one selection, or maybe I'd love to do a book at some point, but then I can still continue it on. Just because I have an exhibition or make a book doesn't mean I have to put it to bed and start working on something else. So I guess that's mostly the story of all of this, but I would be excited to hear if anyone has any questions or anything. Yeah.
Were any of your cohort or your subjects particularly feeling disenfranchised, like you are or were? That was the basis for your work?
Yes, yeah. So, in the beginning, I was specifically trying to, I was looking for more people who had more direct experiences like that I was, that I had. But then after I was kind of branching out more, I realized that it was a more universal experience, especially in the queer community, than I had, realized. That it seemed like everyone on some level had some kind of emotional connection or was able to relate to those experiences, that I was having, even if it wasn't exactly the same. If it was like a little bit more universal. So I kind of wasn't. I started like branching out more and not feeling like I needed to focus on people that had experiences very similar to mine or could relate to exactly the feelings I had, since overall it was a little more universal. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Yeah.
You mentioned that you don't bring a lot of props and then just tell them. So I'm curious if you're willing to share about your creative process from dress casual to marks on the head.
Oh, yeah.
This fascinates me so much.
Yeah, so it's just, I'll say in most cases, there are some exceptions, it's just very, very spontaneous, like the case of like, oh, I went to this guy's house and then saw the unicycle and was like, okay, we have to do photos with this, and or like in this one with the person with all the books, he was organizing his bookshelf and just had all these books out just like on the floor by the fireplace, and again, it was like he didn't think anything of it. He was just like, I was like, oh, what's going on here? Like, are you moving or what's going on? He's like, oh, I just want to like reorganize my books. So I just like have them all laid out, and I noticed that it was like this beautiful like setting, and then that led to like us doing photos with that. And in the case, especially for him, in the case of when I was like, like wear whatever you want, he was like, he ran with it, and wore this like really nice, matching red outfit that matched his hair. It's really in the moment. Sometimes it gives me like a lot of anxiety because like walking into, like where I'm like meeting up with someone, I'm like, what if they're really boring? Or like, usually it's, like I said, it's someone I've like been spending some time with beforehand, but I'm like, what if we like go to their place, or like, what if we go where, we want to like hang out and hopefully get some photos? Like, what if just like nothing happens, cause, and sometimes I like envy, people who know exactly, like, they're like, I'm gonna show up to the shoot, this is the photo I wanna get, and I'm gonna like, here's my like plan, in my head, here's my props, I'm gonna get this photo. And sometimes like walking into the situations, I'm like, oh my God, what if I, go home with like absolutely nothing and it's all crap, and or like we don't really click, and there's none of that like playfulness and humor and collaboration. But then, I would say 95% of the time something happens, and I'm able, and something good comes out of it. It might not, this whole series is something like, I have like about like 60 images that I've selected that, I like and can be used for things, but, there are some cases where there's, I'm like, I don't know if I'm gonna include anything from this, but I don't think there's ever been a time where like, there's just like nothing that has happened. And then I've also kind of, I try to flip it on myself and be like, well, if I did like have like a plan, like if I wanted to, if I'm like, okay, here's like the props and the outfit, and I have a picture in mind that I want to get, I feel like I would obsess over trying to get it exactly to match what I have in my head. And like, and I think I've even noticed that like when I've done like more commercial shoots and things like that, where I know what I know what I'm after, and if I can't get it, I'm gonna obsess over it, and I'm gonna like tweak tiny little things. But I realize that like when I have zero expectations walking into it, then there's like that pressure isn't there, and then I think that then also opens it up to just like, play with it and just have fun with it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
How many photographs would you take in your time with that person before you get the one that you want to print and exhibit?
It really depends. I think it depends on how long we're like spending time together. Like sometimes, I might be just like in town for a couple of days, and so it might just be like, it might be someone I meet online or a friend of a friend, and we only spend a couple of hours together. And I always like, want to at least I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to just like show up and take photos and leave, and so I want to spend a little bit of time like chatting with them. So it might be like an hour, and it might be like a few dozen photos. But then in cases where I'm like somewhere for like a residency for a month, it might be I spend time with someone multiple times throughout the month or weeks. And then each like time I might take like a few more additional photos, and then we might end up having like a spontaneous shoot where I might take a few hundred photos, just like, you know, shooting a bunch of different things, and over the course of several hours or, you know, several days or whatever. And I never really, I try, like in the moment, I'm also trying not to like look at the images I'm taking and try to evaluate them. I kind of just try to just make the photos and not worry about it, other than like looking at it to be like, oh, is the lighting okay? Is the exposure okay? Is the framing okay? I don't try to look to anything beyond that. So I don't really know, I mean, I might in the back of my head like look at one and be like, oh, I think that's gonna be a good one. But actually, oftentimes I find it's like the opposite. Like photos I see on the little camera screen, I'm like, oh, that's gonna be a really good one. And then I look at it on the computer and I'm like, oh my God, this is absolute garbage. But then this other photo that I didn't really give much attention to actually is, you know, really good. And then even also if I feel like, you know, if I feel like, oh, you know, I think I've got a good couple of options, if we're still both like going at it and feeling like, you know, we'll just keep going. And so I might walk away from a shoot and have like several photos that I wish I could include all of them, but I don't want to be like, you know, like here's a whole wall of just different variations of like this one person, you know, like there's some people, like especially like this one, I could probably, if I really wanted to, do like a whole exhibition just from this day, because we just did so much, and like I was coming up with ideas and he was coming up with ideas, and yeah, I think just from that day, I think it was like a few hundred, if not like it might even been like 1,000 photos, because I like to shoot a lot, because I make little, you know, we do like little changes or, you know, or something, and yeah, so it really varies.
How much do you talk to the subjects after the fact, after you've edited it down and made some selections? Do you go back and show them your
Oh yeah, absolutely. I try to make it a point that they're always the first one other than me to see, like I will like make a selection that I like, and I will send it to them, because I want to make sure that they see it first, that the first time they're seeing it isn't like on the wall in a museum or a gallery or something, that they, yeah, and then also to kind of like give them the chance to be like, if they're like, oh, I do not like this one, you know, then I'll be like, okay, it's gone. I will delete it, because, you know, I don't want to, you know, if they don't like it, I don't want to use it. Luckily that hasn't, you know, there's only been, you know, like 2 instances, but it's never been anything bad. It's just been, someone's been like, ooh, I don't like, I feel like I'm kind of hunched over in this one and I don't like it. And I'd be like, that's fine. It's, you know, no problem, it's gone. But yeah, and then I'll let them, you know, I try to wait a little bit, let them kind of live with them a little bit, and before I use them with anything, and I mean, and it's been a lot of people that I've met with and photographed, and it's hard to keep in touch with everyone, but there is a lot of people that then I ended up having like really long-lasting friendships with. I mean, in some cases, we met because of the photos, like, you know, I was actively seeking someone to like work together to make photos, and then we just stayed friends, or it was a case of like someone I met, and then early on in us being friends, we did photos, and that just kind of strengthened the friendship, and then we, you know, stayed in touch for a long time. So yeah, so many people I'm still, you know, in touch with, and yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you still develop your own pictures?
Like with film? For fun, yes, I do. There's a few, I don't think any of the ones in this, there's a few in the larger series that I did shoot on film, because I do really like shooting film, and it's so much fun, but like the expense and the time is just so, it's just gotten a little burdensome. especially like recently, like the cost of a roll of film has like doubled in like the last like 4 years. And might probably shoot up a lot more soon. I do it mostly just for fun, just like kind of on the side here and there. So that way I'm also not, I feel like then if I put like a pressure on myself to try, like I might use a lot of film to try to, if I'm only using film. But there have been cases where, shooting it for fun, I get a photo on film and I'm like, oh wait, that could, I can use that, and even though, I wasn't really intending to use it for this body of work. Yeah, so I think I'm always gonna try to do that on the side a little bit for fun. Yeah. Any other questions or anything? Yeah.
What are you doing next?
Gosh, I don't know.
You don't have to be doing
I mean,
that.
yeah, I mean, I'm always continuing this body of work. There's actually this other body of work that that's totally different than anything I've ever done, that I've just been experimenting with, like at some of the residencies I've done, where I've been taking vintage player piano rolls, like those like old, like when you had like a player piano and you'd put like this roll of paper in and it had all the little holes in it, and then it plays the song automatically and you see all the keys going. When I was in Santa Fe in 2022, I went to this like junk shop and they had a whole box of those rolls, and music was something like that I did a lot like as a kid, and we actually like the piano I had like as a kid was a player piano, and so I just bought those and I started like printing cyanotypes on them, which if you don't know, cyanotype is a type of photography, a type of image making where you mix this chemistry and you paint it or coat it on any sort of surface, usually like paper, but you can also do it on some other things. And then it makes it light sensitive to UV light, or so like sunlight. And you can like put objects on it, or you can put a negative on it and you put it out in the sun, or if you want to go fancy and get like a UV light bulb or a UV light source, you can do it that way. And then it imprints the image or like the shadows of the objects onto it, and then you rinse it out, and then and then it becomes permanent. It has this blue color. And so I was printing just some of my photos on the piano roll paper using cyanotypes, but then, and I wasn't quite sure like what it was going to be or anything. But then over the last few years, I actually I had some medical difficulties. I had a surgery that was not done correctly. And then I was like trying to, like I was getting a bunch of testing done, and I went and met with a bunch of surgeons who were like, wouldn't even want to touch it. They were like, this is messed up, like we don't want to try to fix it. And in doing all of that, like I had like a lot of MRIs and CT scans and X-rays, and so I had all of this like medical imagery of like the inside of my own body. And so I started printing those as cyanotypes on that piano roll paper. And so it's just been something I've been kind of like experimenting with, because the paper is it's not like normal paper, so it doesn't really take the chemistry that well. So I've been experimenting with different processes and try to, get it on there nicely. And printing these like, X-rays and CT scans on it. And in my head, I've been calling that series organ music, but so that I want to, expand upon that a little bit more. And then, yeah, I teach sometimes, and I actually work for Marriott, coincidentally, and so I'm doing all sorts of different things. But as far as like I would love to get this exhibition to to travel. Now that it's all ready and good to go, it'd be nice to have this in some other places. But we shall see. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. How are we doing on time? Good? Yeah. Yeah.